Hi, and welcome to the Dynamic Duel Podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Johnny DC.
And I'm his twin brother, Marvelous Joe.
And it's been a while since we've had the chance to review a current television show or movie. This episode, we will be reviewing Season 2 of Doom Patrol, which just wrapped up on HBO Max and the DC Universe app.
Yeah, it's a little bit heartbreaking because the season was really good, but unfortunately, the story was cut short due to a cease in production caused by coronavirus. Well, that's one of the reasons why we haven't been able to review too many new things is because, of course, COVID, which seems to be encompassing all of 2020.
Yeah, COVID is the true villain of the series.
And if you're clamoring for, Marvel or DC superhero media as much as we are, you could do worse than watch Doom Patrol Season 2. In fact, you couldn't do much better, honestly, because the show was just really fantastic. Season 1 and Season 2 are both great, even though Season 2, again, comes up short. But we'll talk all about Doom Patrol Season 2 later on this episode.
Yeah, before our review, we're going to break down the comic book movie news items from the past week, including Nia DaCosta being tapped to direct Captain Marvel 2, and we'll be talking about how over 300 comic and screen celebrities are set to present at the DC Fandome later on this month. It's going to be a huge event. Huge. I can't wait. But as always, we list our segment times in our episode description, so feel free to check out the show notes if you want to skip ahead to a particular topic.
Just a quick reminder, guys, to please subscribe to our show if you haven't already. And if you have, please help us grow our podcast audience by giving us a rating or review on whatever platform you're listening to us on, or by sharing us with your fellow DC and Marvel fans. It's hugely important to us. Anything you guys could do, if you haven't already, really helps. But with that out of the way,
quick to the No Prize.
The No Prize is an award Marvel used to give out up until the 90s to fans. Our version, the Dynamic Duel No Prize, is a digital award we post on social media that we personally draw for those who we feel gave the best answer to our question of the week.
Last week, we talked about how DC will be releasing an interactive, choose-your-own-adventure type animated film, Batman Death in the Family. So to make our podcast more interactive, we had you guys make a choice. Our question was, choose your path. Johnny DC and Marvelous Joe are falling off of a cliff. You could only save one. Who do you choose to save and why?
And we got a lot of crappy answers for this one. As I'm just going to say, usually you guys come through for us. This time, I'm just looking at these answers and I'm just like, what are you guys talking about?
Super bitter because a majority of people said that they would save me.
Which I'm pretty sure is out of pity more than anything else.
Some of them were, honestly. Like, one of the reasons was because I have kids, and you don't. So, if you remember from our last episode, we are starting to limit our honorable mentions to our top 3 favorite each. And then we will be thanking everyone who gave us an answer at the end, before announcing the winners of this week's No Prize.
My first honorable mention goes to Isaiah Bethune, who has his own podcast called The Chunkernauts. He said that he would catch Marvelous Joe and let him decide if he wants to catch Johnny DC. The trick is to let it be his fault, and I still get Marvel news and battles. Now, I don't really appreciate getting blamed for a murder, but I do appreciate the idea behind that reasoning.
And what would you choose? Would you save me?
I'm thinking about it.
It's messed up. Well, to counter that response, my first honorable mention goes to Ken Johnson, who said that he would save me, Johnny DC. And as Marvelous Joe falls and cries out, "Help me," he'll look down and whisper, "No."
It's so dark.
Just like Rorschach. It's awesome.
Yeah, of course that's a Watchmen reference. Yeah, but God, it's just so evil. I remember reading that and I was like, damn. But that's fair. My second honorable mention goes to Richard McGrew, who said that he would construct an alpine slide for Johnny DC to ride down to safety and a jetpack for Marvelous Joe to strap on and land on the ground. And while I usually don't appreciate diplomatic answers, I usually want you guys to choose, one or the other. I actually like that answer because 1, I really enjoy alpine slides, and 2, I think it would be cool to have a jetpack. It's actually like a recurring dream that I have is that I own a jetpack. So it's one of my main fantasies.
Alpine slides are dope. I do like that answer too. But my second honorable mention goes to Dustin Balcom, who said that he would save me, Johnny DC, because Marvelous Joe once called him Dusty Balls. and because DC is superior to Marvel. And anytime I could give Joseph flack for some of the shit he says, I will. So I love that answer.
Let that be a lesson to everyone who listens to this podcast. Don't be an asshole. Because if you are, the time may come when someone has to Sophie's Choice your ass. And you're not going to like it. I'm surprised that he remembered that I called him Dusty Balls once, but I feel like that was like an episode a few years ago.
Yeah, I think it was. You were trying to come up with the nicknames for all of the recurring question of the week answerers.
My final honorable mention goes to Adam Speas, only because this one made me laugh. I don't really like the answer, but it did make me chuckle. He said, I'd save Johnny DC because he is a compassionate person and would try to grab Marvelous Joe. If I saved Joe, he'd just laugh maniacally as Johnny DC fell to his doom. Which is, I'd like to think is not true, but also it would be kind of funny. No?
No, it wouldn't.
Oh, yeah. No, it wouldn't. No, I would try to save you.
Oh, well, thanks, I guess. My final honorable mention goes to Bruce Flansburgh, not because I really liked the answer, but I just cannot stop laughing. He said that he would save me, Johnny DC, seeing as how Joe has lived a life of joy and happiness by being a Marvel fan, and he would feel obligated to save me because perhaps then I would change my ways.
That's right.
Joke's on you, Bruce. Pretty sure I would still like DC.
You wouldn't have an ounce of survivor's guilt?
I mean, I probably would, but that doesn't change the fact that Marvel still sucks.
Wow, man. Wow. And I thought we were brothers.
We are. I said I would feel bad. We want to give a quick shout out to everyone else who answered, including Alex Fowler, Josiah Rodriguez, Jace Crump, Mincemeat Mouse, Calvin Mims, John Speas, Sally9898, Michael Haggerty, Jeremy Orr, Jorg Bailey, Mike Luther, Paige Barger, and Joel Seagrave.
Thank you guys for answering. All of your answers are honorable. But the winners of this week's No Prize are Alex Yanez and Calvin John Della Merced. Now, Alex gave a diplomatic answer, but one that I thought was pretty funny, where he said that he would let both of us fall off, sacrificing 2 loved ones for the Soul Stone. Then he would take over the podcast. I just got to hand it to him for that ambition. And I really like the Avengers Endgame reference. I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
The question is, if you sacrifice 2 loved ones, do you not get 2 Soul Stones? Do you just get 1?
You get 1, but then it gets taken away because you didn't make a choice.
I mean, if I got the Soul Stone, I think I would do crazy stuff like bring all of these fictional comic book characters to life or something. But yeah, I mean, podcasts are fine too.
Yeah. Calvin John Della Merced also gets the win for saying that he would save me, Johnny DC, and he would then surf on Joe while he's falling, Aquaman Parademon style, so that I could draw him the No Prize. Well, congrats! I'm drawing you the No Prize. Good answer.
That was one of the more messed up answers, I gotta say, I think. Not only would he, kill me, he would surf me on the way down the cliff.
I just appreciated the imagery, I think. And I imagine he'd be like, woo! Like Jason Momoa style.
And everyone says, I'm the asshole. Remember this, guys. If we ever, ask this question again, everyone remember that Jonathan was the one who condoned killing me.
Congrats once again to Calvin John Della Merced and Alex Yanez. You guys win this week's No Prize. If you, the listener, want your own shot at winning a No Prize, stay tuned till later on in the episode when we'll ask another question of the week.
And now that that's done,
on to the news.
All right, and some relatively bigger news to come from Marvel in the past few months. We've learned this past week that Captain Marvel 2 has a director. We reported last year that Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck were not being asked to return for the sequel, and that Marvel was seeking to find a new voice to helm the franchise. Because as you guys probably are aware, if you've seen Captain Marvel, the movie is good, but it's not great. It was a little bit underwhelming. Not to say that it didn't have great visuals, just that when you compare it to some of Marvel's best films, it didn't quite hold up.
Yeah, I don't think it was quite what Marvel wanted in terms of its impact on the fandom.
Yeah, the film came out rather generic. But what's exciting is that the new director that Marvel has hired for the sequel is Nia DaCosta, who has directed the soon-to-be-released Candyman reboot. She was handpicked by Jordan Peele himself to direct that film. So between Jordan Peele's pick and Marvel's pick, it sounds like they have a lot of high expectations for her talent, which is exciting because I haven't actually seen any of her work. She hasn't directed a whole lot of movies before Candyman, but she directed a couple of episodes of Top Boy and the movie Little Woods and the short Night and Day.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard of any of those films, but I have seen the trailer for Candyman, and it looks pretty intense.
Have you seen the puppet trailer for Candyman? The shadow puppet trailer that was directed by her? It is freaking incredible. Oh my God. It is a work of art.
Really?
I'm not talking about like the live action trailer for that film. There was like this teaser trailer that they released that was done entirely in shadow puppets. And it's a vision. It's really creepy. And it really gets me excited to see Candyman.
I saw Candyman as a kid, so I think I'll be avoiding the reboot because I want to be able to go into my bathroom alone at night.
This director announcement kind of reminds me of the Kate Shortland announcement for Black Widow. When I saw previews of Kate Shortland's work, and she was largely like a European independent film director, I wasn't quite sure what we were going to get from the Black Widow film. Still don't know because, the movie hasn't come out yet. But just judging from the trailers of Black Widow, it looks entirely unlike anything that she's done before. And it looks amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like Marvel's really courting some of these like indie darling directors. And I think that's actually a really good approach to take.
Yeah, because they bring these unique voices to the material. Marvel already knows how to tackle the action and all the blockbuster stuff. But when it comes to the real human drama, no one can treat that better than an independent filmmaker who's created these compelling dramas.
Yeah, I think it'll be pretty promising. Do we have a release date for Captain Marvel 2 yet?
We don't. It's expected to come out around July 8th, 2022, but of course that date's not set in stone considering all the shifting release dates due to COVID. Guys, if you haven't yet, go check out that shadow puppet trailer for Candyman, and then I dare you to tell me that Captain Marvel 2 is going to be bland.
Okay, I'll take up that dare.
Don't be dumb.
In DC news, starting last week, DC has been releasing several teasers regarding the upcoming virtual fan event on August 22nd, the DC Fandome. The first trailer really just took us through some like virtual hallways that might possibly be used in the virtual experience themselves. Because obviously have the 3D models and everything already for it. It wasn't much, but we did get to see quick snippets of little exciting things like Zack Snyder's Darkseid and like a Killer Croc version of Baraka for an upcoming Mortal Kombat game, but the more interesting teaser came later on in the week that was shared by numerous celebrities and filmmakers that touted a list of over 300 celebrities throughout comics and film that are set to attend and present at the DC Fandome. There's going to be a ton of people here.
This is so cool. I really wish that Marvel had something like this because it looks like San Diego Comic-Con on steroids. I mean, it's digital, but if Marvel had an event like this where there were like over 300 comic and film celebrities attending, it would be like Christmas Day for me.
This absolutely will like change my life. I guarantee it. Like there will be my life before the DC Fandome and there will be my life after the DC Fandome. And that's how I will measure it.
I said Christmas Day. I wasn't talking about like life changing.
Oh, Jonathan. No, that's what I'm talking about.
Check your expectations for the DC Fandome event. I'm just telling you right now, man.
Some of the biggest names confirmed to attend include Gal Gadot, Zack Snyder, James Gunn, The Rock, Matt Reeves, Robert Pattinson, Damon Lindelof, which is a surprise. Maybe they'll announce Watchmen Season 2, Brian Michael Bendis, and Jeff Johns. And the list just goes on and on and on.
Are you surprised to see Jeff Johns among those names, considering that he's kind of been ousted from DC?
Not really. Actually, he's one of the producers on Doom Patrol, and Stargirl has been phenomenal. Season 1, and he's the showrunner for that series. So yeah, I'm not surprised he'll be there. I'm hoping he'll announce Doom Patrol Season 3 and Stargirl Season 2. But yeah, like each one of those people also shared on their social media accounts, the teaser for the DC Fandome. And The Rock's video included a first look at Black Adam. It's essentially just a silhouette of him in like this Egyptian tomb or something like that. It looks pretty cool. And I'm sure we'll see more at the DC Fandome. What I think, though, was the coolest bit of info to come out of all of these teasers for the DC Fandome was Rocksteady Studios' first poster for their Suicide Squad video game.
That was cool.
It's an image of Superman with his back to you, with a crosshair over his head that says Suicide Squad over it. And it is like the coolest logo.
They should use that logo for the movie.
Right? It looks like there is some truth to the rumors of the whole Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League video game. That's going to be an awesome game. And I can't wait to see like some kind of teaser for it at the end of this month. I'm definitely going to bring all of the fervor I have built up to the event on August 22nd for the full 24 hours, not going to sleep, just going to watch. I'm really looking forward to seeing everything they have at the show. And that brings us to our question of the week. What news do you most hope comes out of the DC Fandome event?
Post your answer to our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or email us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com. We'll pick our favorite answer and draw that person a Dynamic Duel No Prize that we'll post to social media. But that does it for all the news for this week, so let's go ahead and get into the main event of this episode, where we talk all about Doom Patrol Season 2 on DC Universe and HBO Max.
Alright, so as we mentioned earlier, last week, Doom Patrol wrapped up its second season as an exclusive, sort of, to both HBO Max and the DC Universe app. Season 1, of course, was available only on the DC Universe app for its initial run, which meant that almost no one saw it, which is a shame. I loved this series, I loved the first season, I told everyone I could that they should watch it because, in my opinion, Doom Patrol is the best television series DC has ever made, next to Watchmen. So I guess you could say Doom Patrol is DC's best ongoing television series, since Watchmen was a miniseries.
Yeah, I would agree with that totally. I've never seen Titans, but I loved Watchmen. I thought that was an amazing show. It was a near perfect sequel to Alan Moore's original series. And Doom Patrol is entirely different.
Yeah.
But entirely enjoyable on a level that I don't think most comic book TV shows are, because they're so stringent on the world that they set up. Now, there's plenty of world building in Doom Patrol, but it doesn't have to adhere to any of them. Right. Every single episode is a rule breaker, and that's what makes it so exciting to watch.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, if you haven't seen Doom Patrol, I understand why. HBO Max is expensive, and DC Universe is for a niche market. That said, if you subscribe to either of those platforms, there's no excuse to not be watching this show. If you're a fan of absurd, mind-bending, yet heartfelt comedy with a compelling cast of characters, like Rick and Morty or Futurama, then Doom Patrol may just be your new favorite show. Now, if I've sold you with that pitch, and you're like, maybe I should check this show out, do everything you can to watch it and stop listening now, because we'll be venturing into spoiler territory at this moment. And you don't want to ruin all of the show's surprises for yourself.
Yeah, and I have to say that the show is very non sequitur. If you haven't seen it, you're not going to understand really anything about what we're saying. Like when we say flesh-eating butt monsters, that's not going to do anything for you. You know, you have to have seen it. It's that kind of show where there's just so much interesting things going on that don't make sense outside of the context in which they happen. I do have to say, if you are still listening and you haven't watched the seasons yet, I would recommend watching all of Season 1 first, and then just the first 4 episodes of Season 2. I would not recommend watching any further after Episode 4 of Season 2, because that begins the arc that leads to the season's conclusion that doesn't get resolved. So I would actually wait to start Episode 5 until we get more Doom Patrol episodes and the current arc is resolved.
Yeah, my wife and I watched the first half of Season 2 together, and I had to watch the rest on my own. And I've already told her, like, maybe wait to watch the rest of the season when you could watch it with Season 3, because there's no point in being let down by an incomplete story.
Right.
Okay, if you're still listening, I'm hoping it's because you've seen both seasons of Doom Patrol, and you already know how good the show is. And it goes without saying that Season 2 was practically perfect, except for that cliffhanger ending, which I'm trying my hardest not to fault the show for, because I understand that COVID-19 prevented the cast from finishing the final episode. This was supposed to be a 10-episode season, and it looks like that 10th episode was going to be critical in wrapping up character arcs and tying up loose ends. It's like Season 1 of Titans all over again. It just ends on this infuriating cliffhanger. Actually, speaking of Titans, it was on that show that the Doom Patrol characters first appeared. I recently went back and watched that episode. It sucks. Almost everyone is out of character. The Chief can walk and was played by a different actor. If you're a fan of the Doom Patrol show, there's no need to watch the Titans episode with them in it.
Really?
Yeah, just avoid it at all costs.
Okay. I was so glad that you actually watched the end of the season before me, because you were like, what the fuck? And I'm like, why? What's wrong? And you're like, it ends on a cliffhanger. And I'm like, oh. And then I researched it, found out that there was supposed to be 10 episodes. And so I was able to, manage my expectations to be, disappointed. But, the disappointment still hit hard at the end of that episode. All I want to do is watch more Doom Patrol after that ending.
Right.
And I can't. And season 3 has not even been greenlit yet. So we don't even know if we're going to get season 3 yet.
That's like the biggest source of my heartache with this season, is that they haven't announced season 3 yet. I'm really, really hoping, again, that they announce it during the DC Fandome. All of the major players are going to be there, the showrunner, the cast, so hopefully they do it.
That's a really good sign. If they were planning on canceling the show, they probably wouldn't have them show up.
Right. Now, one reason I've long suspected that the show reportedly doesn't have the largest following is because its absurdity doesn't make it as accessible as other conventional superhero fare, including shows like The Titans. But I feel like its weirdness is the show's biggest advantage, because like you mentioned earlier, it can do a lot that other shows can't. It's just so different and so much smarter than anything else in the genre, which itself is hard to place. Like, it's definitely a comedy, definitely sci-fi, definitely fantasy, but it dabbles in action and horror and drama. It's all over the place, and it does it all really well.
I think it's primarily a comedy. I think the Rick and Morty comparison that you made earlier was apt in that each episode feels like its own world.
And because of that, it's almost impossible to predict what's going to happen next. I think I've mentioned on this podcast before that one method I use to gauge the intelligence of a show is by how predictable it is. Like, if a show can circumvent expectations, it shows that the writers can think outside of the box. Based on how season 1 set up season 2, and based on the show's marketing, I thought that this season was going to focus each episode on exploring a new, wacky way for the Chief to achieve immortality. Really, they only did that for, like, the second episode, Time Patrol, and then the story moved on after the Chief rejected Red Jack's offer to become his immortal protege.
Yeah, I thought that's where the series was going to go too, and I actually found the Time episode to be one of, like, the duller aspects of this season.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that they didn't continue down that route.
Yeah, I agree. Now, speaking of Dr. Time and Red Jack, one complaint that I have with this season is that its villain or villains weren't as strong as Mr. Nobody in season 1. I freaking loved Alan Tudyk as Mr. Nobody. Like, the way he broke the fourth wall, the way he toyed with the members of the Doom Patrol. He could essentially do anything, and his motive was very personal and relatable. I couldn't relate to the Candlemaker or Dr. Time or Red Jack or the Scant Queen or any of the villains in the second season. In a way, some of the more frightening villainous turns came from the quote-unquote heroes this season, which was interesting and perhaps why this season to me still felt as strong as the first in spite of not having an interesting villain.
Yeah, I noticed that Mr. Nobody was noticeably absent from the Scant episode. And they kind of just gave a bullshit excuse where Beard Hunter was like, oh, he's off doing animated work or something like that, referring to the Harley Quinn animated show on DC Universe.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just great fourth wall breaking. I love it.
Which makes sense for the character of Mr. Nobody. His power is the power of narration, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I like about this show so much, I think, is how unconventional it is. Like most great superhero shows like Daredevil, especially like season 3, those are very much traditional superhero morality tales. But Doom Patrol wonderfully highlights the fact that you can still have superhero characters in a story and not have it be about good versus evil. You can have it literally be about anything. And, I have to say that there is still a lot of good versus evil within the show, but its primary focus, I think, is more on character than on plot. We get to learn these characters better than literally any other superhero character that we've seen on screen. We know these guys inside and out, and we explore each one in such a fascinating way that it just makes me love the characters. Like, I feel so much more emotionally invested in this show than in any of Marvel's shows, honestly, and all those characters are really well developed, but not like this. This is a very psychological show. It's a very philosophical show, packaged with just a bunch of 4-letter words and outlandish characters. It's brilliant.
It's right up my alley, honestly. I love it. It's actually gotten me to read a lot of Doom Patrol comic books. Grant Morrison's run is just insane, and this show actually borrows a lot from it.
Grant Morrison is an eccentric genius.
He is next level, as is this show. The characters, to me, are its biggest draw, and their story arcs and themes. The overall themes of this season were identity, parenthood, and mortality, which surprisingly blended seamlessly with the first season's overarching theme of self-acceptance. In the first season, the team each had to grapple with who they were before these catastrophes befell them, and by the end of the season, they came to the realization that they had transformed into better people over the years while living with each other and the chief as they adapted to their new tragic lives. It's a human psychological example of catastrophe theory, which was the chief's motive in the comics during Grant Morrison's run for why he caused Cliff's, Rita's, and Larry's accidents. Each of them, despite their faults, had every privilege they could want, with little regard to others. By making them more like monsters on the outside, at the chief's doing, they became more human on the inside, people with compassion and a heroic spirit. What didn't kill them made them stronger, albeit, in the Joker's words, also stranger. The Chief's motive was different in the TV show, but catastrophe theory was still a tangible aspect of the characters and the story from season 1.
The Chief sounds very pompous in the comic books. Like, who the hell is he to enact that kind of morality lesson in such a destructive way? That's horrible.
He is probably the greatest doctor and one of the greatest scientists in the DC universe. He's absolutely pompous. It all came from the fact that he suffered his own kind of catastrophe when he lost his legs, and he felt he grew into a better person from that, and he just wanted to share that with the rest of the world. It's really twisted.
That's kind of like a villain's plot. I much prefer the motivation of the Chief within this show, I think.
Let's dive deeper into this in our character breakdown, starting with the Chief, since much of the show revolves around him. So Dr. Niles Calder, aka the Chief, is played by the legendary Timothy Dalton. I think he's perfect in this role. He brings the right amount of charisma and menace. You know, he does these horrible things, but you trust his knowledge and resources, and you kind of pity him.
Yeah, he's in a really tough situation.
Yeah, in the show, you know, his motivation was a bit more altruistic than it was in the comics, but it's also just as complex and almost as controversial. He wanted to protect the world from his daughter Dorothy, and there was no line he wasn't willing to cross to do that because of the potential threat she posed to humanity. He loved his daughter more than anything or anyone, but not at the cost of mankind's existence. And as a father, I can relate. You know, if I was offered the opportunity to live one day longer than my daughters, I totally would, just to be there with them, just to know that they were safe, to let them know that they were loved unconditionally and that I was proud of them.
It's interesting that at the end, the clock that he was running up against was not his own mortality, but Dorothy's transition into womanhood. And I don't really mean womanhood, I mean she got her period.
Right. The Chief's arc was essentially a race against time, you're right. And throughout the show, you could see him aging more and more. His hair was getting whiter, he was getting closer to death. And that was the central premise of this season. Can the Chief live long enough to find a solution for how his daughter, Dorothy, could exist safely in the world without him in it? And it's not just her, but the rest of his quote-unquote children in the Doom Patrol, because he also loves and protects them. He sacrificed his longevity to bring normalcy back to everyone's lives when they were shrunk, and I believed him when he told them not to burden themselves with his time dilemma. But as it is with the Chief, for every time he designs Cliff a new body, he's also ejecting Robot Man out into space. For every time he sings Dorothy to sleep, he's also orchestrating backdoor deals to have her killed. The character is insanely complex.
At the very least, it's good that you see him feel the burden of the responsibility he has on his shoulders. He may have done these horrible things, but he's also done a lot of good, and the bad things that he's done, he does regret.
And I think that was done much more successfully in season 2 than in season 1. You were able to sympathize with him a little bit more. Now, each of the characters had these unresolved loose ends story-wise this season. The Chief's was, is he going to live? What do you think? Let's do some speculation here for the start of season 3.
For the Chief's story, I think that it could go either way because in some regard, he needs to pay for the sins that he's committed. In another sense, his remorse and his brilliance makes him too valuable to lose. From a real-world context, I think that maybe Timothy Dalton is a little bit too expensive to keep on the show.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if they killed him. I would also be really fascinated to see where these characters' lives go when they don't have their dear leader.
Do you want to know what happens in the comics? Is that a spoiler? In the comics, the Candlemaker rips off the chief's head, and the chief goes on living as a disembodied head.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Sometimes attached to the body of like a robot or like a woman's torso. It's really bizarre. I could totally see them going that route in season 3.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's what this show is all about. Just weirdness like that. Stuff where you go, what the fuck? Just as Robot Man is saying it.
Exactly. Moving on to Dorothy Spinner. Dorothy Spinner was my favorite character this season. She was played to absolute perfection by Abigail Shapiro. Now, Abigail and her younger sister Millie, who you may know from the film Hereditary, are Broadway actresses, and it shows in Abigail's technical masterclass performance. Through the makeup, through the accent, her performance was on par with, and you could even say better than, an already impressive cast.
I felt so much for Dorothy this entire season. She's just such a tragic character. It was so endearing. I just wanted to make sure that she was okay and that nothing would ever hurt her. I felt like the chief, honestly.
Right.
Like seeing all these things happen to her was just so heartbreaking.
For sure. I mentioned earlier how this season's overall theme was identity. In Dorothy's case, it was deciding whether she was the 11-year-old girl her father said she was, or a woman free to make her own choices like the Candlemaker kept suggesting. She wanted to be free to make her own choices, to stay up late, to wear makeup, to stay with her father. The problem with her choices was that she was so sheltered her whole life by the chief, she lacked the wisdom to fully grasp that her choices have consequences. So even though she's 100 years old, she's still immature in that sense.
I love how she grew from that into this, I guess, warrior. And, in the very last shot of the season where, she manifests her own weapon to go and fight the Candlemaker to, fulfill her destiny, apparently as her mother wants her to.
That weapon was so next level badass.
I know, it looked like Mjolnir on one end and like this cool like crystal spear kind of thing on the other end.
Yeah, it was really cool. In line with her decision as to whether she was a child or woman was the decision as to whether she was sweet and innocent or someone capable of killing Danny the Brick or Baby Doll. She was almost as complex a character as her father, and just as well written, I think, because I understood every time she wanted to react negatively. Even though I didn't want her to, I understood why she would.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard when you have all these voices talking to you in your head.
Yeah, I can imagine. When it comes to whether she's innocent or not, I think she's both. And because of that, I'm hesitant to call her the villain of this season, because as we see in the final shot of the last episode, as you mentioned, she's also a hero.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the Candlemaker, really, who's the villain. I wouldn't classify her as the villain, even though she did make the wish to kill Baby Doll.
The Candlemaker is sort of like the devil on her shoulder.
Exactly. It was he who compelled her to make that wish, who really pushed her over the edge, where otherwise I don't think that she would have done that. The Candlemaker, the special effects on that guy were really cool. This show made great use of its budget when it needed to.
Yeah, it looked like it had a much bigger budget this season than in season 1.
Yeah.
Because Mr. Nobody always looked kind of fake, but the Candlemaker was legit threatening. I think one of the reasons Abigail Shapiro was able to play this role so well is because of her background. Abigail is actually 20 years old right now, though she was probably 19 when she filmed this show. She and her sister Millie have a condition known as cleidocardial dysostosis. It affects the bones of about 1 in every 1 million people, and those people tend to be shorter.
Yeah, that's the condition that the Dustin kid has from Stranger Things.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, like it affects the collarbones and the teeth.
And the skull.
Yeah.
You know the young boy who played Niles Calder in the Red Jack episode?
Yeah.
That was actually Abigail Shapiro.
What?
Yeah, this was definitely a technical performance.
She's an amazing actress.
She's really good. Dorothy's loose end was, of course, will she stop the Candlemaker? And, of course she will, but we don't know how that'll look, if she'll survive, or if she'll need help from the others.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because on one hand, Dorothy does die in the comics. We know that from your Robot Man profile in the last episode. On the other hand, I don't think that they would do that in this show. I don't think they would kill off Dorothy. But on the other hand, I also don't know what her role would be on the team without the chief, if the chief doesn't survive.
Well, I actually have an idea for that. Let's talk about it as we talk about Robot Man. Now, you mentioned in our X-Men review a couple of episodes back that there are some casting choices that are just so perfect, like Robert Downey Jr. for Iron Man or Hugh Jackman for Wolverine, that it's almost impossible to imagine anyone else being more successful in that role. I'd like to include Brendan Fraser on that list.
You can't just do that nilly-willy.
No, I just did. Deal with it. I know it's essentially like just a voice role. Riley Shanahan is actually the actor in the suit, and he's phenomenal. But even if Robot Man was CGI, Brendan Fraser's voice work is just so perfect for the role. He brings so much humanity through his voice that I relate to him more than any other character in the show. Like, he reacts to things the same way I would. I think I've said, what the fuck, more times watching this show than I had prior.
Yeah, like, my reaction when he saw the sex demons was like, I really have no idea what the fuck is happening right now. That was so perfect.
Yeah, Robot Man on ecstasy is way more hilarious than I thought it would be.
Do you want drugs? The chief has drugs. Oh, God.
In the first season, Cliff Steele came to terms with the fact that he is a robot man and that his daughter had moved on. He kind of did a 180 this season as he tried to determine whether a robot man can still be a father, which meant trying to mend his relationship with his daughter. And he did, which was a surprising outcome for a number of reasons, one being that in the flashback with Brendan Fraser early in the season, where he confronts his father about not being invited to the wedding, he's taught that whoever he becomes or whoever he's with, all he has in his life is self-respect. It's a very, like, me against the world, I'm going to do whatever I want kind of viewpoint. And when Cliff exercises that lesson by harassing his daughter outside her home, his plan to start a relationship with her backfired.
Right. He was just too much. There are times where Robot Man could just be, too much. That's kind of what's endearing about it, but sometimes you watch him and you gotta go be like, dial it down, man. Just dial it down a notch. Dial it down to 11 for once.
In my opinion, I think his relationship with his daughter should have stayed the way it was, because I thought that they were going to make Robot Man more of a father figure for Dorothy, because that's what he was in the comics. Like, in the comics, Dorothy isn't the daughter of the chief. She was just a little girl abandoned by her parents.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and Timothy Dalton, he's always been listed in the credits of the show as having, a special appearance status. It's sort of like this elevated credit that established actors get in smaller, impermanent, or non-recurring roles. So I've always figured that the character of the chief would one day be written out of the show. I thought that was going to happen this season, and maybe it was going to happen in the lost episode 10. But I figured once the chief died, he would leave Dorothy in Robot Man's care, sort of a way to make amends for taking him away from his own daughter and fill that parental void in his life. Like, he would give him Dorothy and maybe a new prototype body that still, didn't have all of its kinks worked out. I think that would set up some really interesting story elements for season 3.
Yeah, and that still may happen. The fact that Robot Man may not be able to attend his daughter's wedding may sour his relationship with her.
That's true. My favorite moment with Robot Man this season was when the chief ejected him from his spaceship and Robot Man had to walk all the way back home after crash landing. His legs malfunctioned and he had to give shout outs to this guy's friends in order to use his cell phone.
One love. So good.
Yeah. I also loved the Steel and Stone bit. Like, DC Comics needs to turn that into a real comic book.
Yes, that was amazing. My favorite part of that little sketch was when Cyborg was taking a shower and opened up the curtain and Robot Man pulled a gun on him and he pulled a gun on him from the shower and they're like yelling at each other, pointing their guns at each other, and then they just start laughing. It was so stupid.
It was great. I also found myself laughing at Cliff's imaginary friend in the last episode, a foul-mouthed Jesus Christ.
Yes.
It was just so much sacrilege, but it was kind of sweet the way they reconciled sort of at the end before Jesus blew him up. Like, I can't wait to start using the gif, "You think I give a French fried titty fuck what you have to say?" on Twitter.
Yes. That one also made me laugh so hard. That was just, it was so good. Jesus, you were my imaginary friend for one summer at Bible camp. He's like, how do you think that makes me feel?
Also, Jesus just taking his own name in vain. I need to believe in my father. I'm sure you know how that goes.
I mean, if Robot Man does take on the role of being a paternal figure for Dorothy in subsequent episodes, I wonder how that will change his relationship with Jane.
When the comics, his relationship with Jane was always romantic.
And here I don't really get that vibe. It almost seems like what was revealed in the final episode of this season was that Jane is the personality that rejects romantic relationships.
And that may be the case. But maybe that's her arc in the next season, to finally accept a romantic relationship.
You think we'll see Robot Man and Jane make out?
That would be weird. It needs to happen now. It needs to happen. It can't not happen.
Robot Man will just be like, I know what I'm doing. I'm just, moving my mouth a little bit. I don't feel any of this.
I'm stupid. I fucked up. I'm sorry. They just start making out.
I thought it was so great. It was like his big arc culmination when he apologized to his daughter.
Yeah, totally.
His loose end is he going to make the wedding? Is his repaired relationship with his daughter going to last?
And what do you think?
It all depends on what happens with Dorothy, really. They're leaving it open. I think they definitely have the option to explore his role as a grandfather or his role as, a paternal figure for Dorothy.
Yeah, I guess it's nice that the writers have options.
Yeah.
I'm rooting for Dorothy, though. Moving on to Crazy Jane. Crazy Jane is played by Diane Guerrero, who is just so impressive in this role. Her acting range is a sight to behold.
It's fascinating to watch, honestly. The way, her Miranda is so much different from her Jane, who is so much different from her baby doll. It's really a masterclass, almost, in acting. And really, I've never even heard of Diane Guerrero outside of the show. I know she was on, Orange is the New Black, but I don't remember her from that.
A lot of fans are campaigning for her to be Jessica Cruz, the Green Lantern, in some kind of live-action adaptation.
Yeah, she would be great. I believe she can do anything. It's kind of a shame that the character of Jane is kind of a bitch, but at the end of that last episode, I kind of understood why. As grating as she can be sometimes, her role as the primary is to not take shit from anyone, because that is in the best interest of protecting all of the personalities and the child within her.
Yeah. Jane's arc was sort of the weakest in the first season. She's the only one of the group that didn't really come to terms with who she was before and after getting involved with the chief. She just turned to drugs to numb the other personalities in her head, also known as the Underground. This season, her arc was much more substantial. The other personalities within the Underground didn't like Jane's drug use, and they wanted a new primary personality for their shared body because they felt Jane was putting her relationships with the other Doom Patrol members above what was best for Kay, the original personality they all worked to protect, kind of like a village of parents. As the Underground experimented with new primaries, I thought for a while Baby Doll was going to be the perfect fit for the group and for Dorothy, but that went real bad real quick. Once Dorothy got mad at Baby Doll for swatting at Manny's nose, I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
And when Baby Doll started telling Dorothy how her father was evil, I was like, oh shit. And after Flaming Katie killed Manny, I was like, oh fuck. And then when Dorothy made that wish with those dangerous eyes, I was just like, fuck.
Yeah, I was flipping the table. That was an
Totally.
intense episode, for sure.
Once it all went down, it was easy to see why the Underground would want someone new in charge. And that person was Miranda, an old primary that emerged from the well that the others were dumping the bodies of Baby Doll and Flaming Kate into.
Right, it's where the personalities would go to die. But it's not really Miranda. Who is it? I think that's the big loose thread that we'll see unfold in the next episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it the father? It can't be the father. Why would the Underground manifest a personality based around what they fear the most?
Yeah, I felt like they were trying to tease that it was the father, but I don't think that's the complete story. Now, Miranda's backstory was pretty tragic. She did a lot to get Kay away from her abusive father, and she fell in love, but was traumatized by the orgy her boyfriend forced her to be in. And that was a hard scene to watch, for several reasons, primarily because you're essentially watching a rape. Miranda clearly didn't want what was happening to her. I mean, the way she kept switching personalities was heartbreaking.
It was really hard to watch.
Yeah. This was also the birth of sorts of Jane as the primary personality when she told her boyfriend and everyone else participating to fuck off. And I was like, you tell him, because that was bullshit. The sex scenes in this season were a little over the top, and I felt like they crossed a line that I didn't think HBO could cross, even with shows like Game of Thrones.
No, I've seen worse on HBO.
What?
Yeah, there's no line with HBO.
It got pretty, like, explicit in the
Did you see a P? Did you see a V? Did you see a P going into a V? No? Then
Why are
you're
you
good.
calling them P's and B's? I guess not.
Yeah, exactly. It's fine. Game of Thrones had this kind of stuff.
I guess that's true. But, like, what about the sex ghosts from the Sex Patrol episode? Like, the lingering
Yes.
ghosts served no purpose for the rest of the episodes when they just popped up randomly.
They were there to be hilarious. Just random ghosts having sex in the middle of the mansion.
I guess it's funny in an absurdist kind of way. It would be funny, I think, if it wasn't so shocking. Because you see a lot.
Do you see a P going in a V?
Oh my gosh. No.
Then you're good.
Okay.
The Sex Patrol episode was my favorite episode by far.
Really?
Not only because it had, the Dannyzins and the big party for Danny the Brick, but the absurdity of the Sex Patrol and how, like, Rita was trying to clear her mind, so she got Flex Mentallo to give her, like, orgasms, which is ridiculous in itself, but they were so strong that they awoke, like, this sex demon who came and, like, unleashed these sex ghosts, and Robot Man danced with him, and he was like, oh my god, I danced with a sex demon! And then, he was giving birth, and, like, how they had to stop the baby from, like, screaming, and, like, how they couldn't stop the sex demon at first because they just kept orgasming too hard whenever they got close to him, and how Larry was like, Cliff, go in there, you're the only one of us who can't orgasm, and he was like, A, I'm high as fuck right now, and B, you just embarrassed me in front of the sex man.
I think that was my favorite moment with Jane in this whole series, when she, just as Hammerhead, just fighting these intense orgasms just to shove that baby right back up that demon.
So good. Like, what I really want to do is just make a supercut of just these random clips from this show and then show them to somebody who has never seen the show, just out of context, and just see what they have to say about it. Like,
Right.
Did they just get farted out of a donkey? Did they just shove a baby up a dude's taint? Like, what is happening with this show?
Please, someone do that. Please, someone make that YouTube video and then share it with us. Getting back to Jane, part of Jane's arc was, like the Chiefs, a race against time. Personalities in the underground were disappearing as Kay was supposedly healing, and Jane didn't want to disappear from existence by becoming irrelevant and obsolete. Survival is a powerful motivator, probably like the most powerful, so it was easy to identify with her. Of course, as you mentioned, we learn near the end that Kay isn't healing and that Miranda isn't really Miranda, but something else.
Eventually, as Kay does fully heal, she won't have a need for all of these other personalities anymore, and Jane will no longer be.
I think that's something that she kind of realized this season. Now, the end fight against all of their imaginary friends, I was really hoping to see, like, all of the underground personalities manifest in the real world. For some reason, Miranda, like, was encased in wax. We never got to see when that happened or why that happened, but we did get to see her wax form just lying on the ground. I do think that maybe having all of the underground personalities come out and manifest is something they could do, and probably will do, in the Season 3 pilot. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, it would totally make sense.
So Negative Man, or Larry Traynor, is voiced by Matthew Bomer, who also plays him in flashbacks, and was also almost cast as Superman in The Man of Steel.
He would have made a great Clark Kent, for sure.
The closest he's actually gotten to playing Superman is voice work for Superman in the animated Superman Unbound film, and he also got to play Clark Kent in a couple of Japanese car commercials.
He looks a lot like Henry Cavill.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Matthew Zuck plays the physical role of Negative Man, and just like Brendan Fraser and Riley Shanahan make the perfect Robot Man, Matt Bomer and Matthew Zuck make a perfect Negative Man, in my opinion.
He is the heart of this show. He has more emotional, touching moments than any other character.
Yeah, and each character has really touching emotional beats, so that's saying a lot.
Yeah.
Larry's arc in the first season involved him coming to terms with not only being gay and being comfortable with that, but also hurting his family and secret lover because he couldn't be true to himself. His negative spirit really helped him come to terms with his past so that he didn't see himself as a monster, and through that, he was better able to wield the power of the negative spirit. This season, now that he had reconciled with who he was, like Cliff, he had to determine whether he could, after all of these years, still be a father and make amends in some way for never going back with his family after all those years, because he knew, unlike Cliff, that his family was still alive. He saw one of his sons, Gary, die, and he met his other son, Paul, at the funeral. Larry got to meet 3 lower generations of his family, and he tried to make amends, but the question of whether he could still be a family man was answered for him when his vindictive son Paul called the Bureau of Normalcy on him and tried to get him captured.
That was a hard moment to watch because you see Larry come all this way. You see him go on this journey of personal discovery, personal acceptance, and you just feel for the guy. It's so cathartic watching him come to terms with himself and really branch out, kind of come out of his shell a little bit and develop as a character. When you see someone that's supposed to be close to him reject him still, despite how far he's come, it makes me angry that his son did that to him.
When Larry's negative spirit came out and just laid waste to all of those officers, then carried Rita and Larry off into the sky, it was definitely Larry's coolest action scene. Probably his only action scene of the season. Though, of course, it did come at the cost of his grandson getting caught in the crossfire. But he lived, so who cares? And his son deserved it.
Yeah. It's amazing the lack of action that I'm able to accept from this show. Like, I don't even really care. Like, the fact that we only saw the negative spirit fight once this season didn't even really register to me. That's not really the purpose of this show, is to see them fight. The purpose of the show is really to explore who they are.
Yeah, even like in the final episode, the only one who really fought was Robot Man against Jesus.
And he got his ass kicked.
Yeah. The other characters, like Larry, he kind of just fell down and became wax. Rita had like a dance-off, sort of. And Vic just had a conversation. A new conflict arose when he met Negative Woman, Valentina Vostok. I didn't realize who she was at first. I thought the pioneers of the Uncharted were just knockoffs of the challengers of the unknown.
That's
and
what
they
I
were, but it was a cool way to introduce Negative Woman. And once I heard her name, I was like, oh, that's so awesome. I love surprise cameos. Valentina basically informed Larry that in order to gain full control over his negative spirit, so that he wouldn't be radioactive and be able to live a normal life, he'd have to sacrifice his identity as Larry Trainer and surrender to a new shared identity between him and the negative spirit. But Larry just got used to who he was as a person. He didn't want to give up being human. He didn't want to disappear, just like Jane didn't want to. They didn't want to die. And it's an interesting concept, like, is giving up your identity dying? Is it a form of death? It's deep. I really liked Larry's and Jane's arcs this season.
Now, if Larry becomes one with his negative spirit, though, will that heal his body?
That's a good question. It might. I mean, he received those injuries as a result of, like, crashing. I don't think that happened to Valentina.
Right.
Zip and Specs. Those guys, that was kind of tragic what happened to those guys.
It was.
Hilarious, but also tragic. Didn't know whether to laugh or cry.
I think ultimately laugh because after that came the line where Negative Woman was like, if any fruit grows here, don't eat it.
Yeah. Larry didn't really have a loose end to tie up at the end of the last episode, though I do wonder why, again, he turned to wax. Like, he didn't have an imaginary friend that revealed some kind of harsh truth to him, so it's not like he succumbed to some kind of despair.
Right, and that was a little bit disappointing, honestly. I felt like he was given the short stick in that episode. Because by learning who these characters' imaginary friends were, we got to learn more about them in general. And it's always fun learning about them.
It's like he just saw Willoughby Kipling and then freaked out and then turned into wax. It was cool to see Willoughby Kipling this season. He's sort of a knockoff of Constantine. I think Grant Morrison actually wanted to use Constantine in the Doom Patrol comics, but Vertigo wouldn't let him. So he created the knockoff character of Willoughby. It's kind of interesting how there's like so many layers and so many more stories behind even minor characters.
And minor scenes, like when the Templar Knights were speaking with the guinea pig.
Yes. It was like, what?
Like, it makes sense in terms of the plot, you know, and it pushes it along, but I just have so many more questions than what this show is really willing to give. I think it delights in its weirdness.
Maybe they will down the line. But you're right, if it was any other show, it would be like, what is this? Why is this here? This show, you just kind of accept everything that comes at you. Moving on to Rita Farr, a.k.a. Elasti-Woman or Elastigirl, though they don't call her that in the show. She's played exquisitely by April Bowlby. Her performance comes across as somewhat technical too, like every line delivery, every head turn and pose. She knows her craft, and it's perfect for an actress who's playing an actress.
Yeah, it's another one of those performances that's brilliant to watch. And I never knew who April Bowlby was, but I looked her up because I was curious, and I was just fascinated at how she was able to like transform herself into Rita Farr. Because in other shows like 2.5 Men, it seemed like she was just this eye candy, you know? But here, she's an incredibly rich and fully fleshed out character.
Oh yeah, she's one of my favorites on the show. Rita's arc in the first season was all about accepting that she was not a kind person, that she made mistakes and wasn't perfect on the inside or out. But she could do better. Like she could use her talents in other ways to help people, such as a superhero, which she tried to do this season. Now, Rita's a fighter, and when things are tough, such as when someone insults her, she gives it her all. And toward the end, she actually got to save someone under the heroic guise of the Beekeeper, which, I don't know, seems kind of pointless since she already has a superhero persona in the comics as Elastigirl.
It's just another path to self-discovery. I think she'll graduate from being the Beekeeper into being Elastigirl herself.
I did think that the Beekeeper and Borg Avengers parody was pretty neat.
Yeah, I did like the style, that 60s era Avengers style.
Yeah.
And by Avengers, I don't mean Marvel's Avengers.
Right.
I mean the British spy series, of course. Which is why the movie The Avengers was called Avengers Assemble in Britain, because they already have their own Avengers.
Little known fact. Now, Rita had to decide this season whether or not she was still an actress, and she learned some pretty harsh truths about herself in a play about her, namely, truths relating to how she craved attention, how she felt about herself, and how she felt about her mother. In a similar way that she had to accept her own faults in the first season, she had to accept her mother's in this one. With the help of Flex Mantello's orgasm-inducing super muscle flex, Rita was able to remember the traumatic experience of watching her mother sleep with the producer so that Rita could get a movie role. Now, that arc never came to any kind of conclusion by episode 9. Like, Rita's imaginary friend was an old paper doll made up of cut-up photos, including her mother's eyes. Rita learns that she doesn't really know who she wants to be. That's why she's always sought after new roles. She only knows that she didn't want to be desperate like her mom, willing to do anything for a role, though that's exactly what she was becoming. I guess we'll see how that plays out in season 3. My favorite scene with Rita is when she had to use her powers to save an unbandaged Larry from skin hooks that Red Jack had him dangling from in order to poison others with Larry's radiation. I thought it was her most heroic moment of the season, because she was risking radiation poisoning. And speaking of that whole Red Jack episode, I thought Red Jack was going to have a much bigger presence throughout this season than he did. I didn't think it was going to be confined to one episode. I was kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, it was interesting because he was kind of offering everything that Niles was striving for, which is immortality. Part of me thinks that old Niles would have taken him up on the offer because he didn't have any qualms about causing suffering in pursuit of his goal. But I think his rejection of the offer was the culmination of the lesson that Niles had learned from season 1, was that it's not worth it to cause the suffering in pursuit of his goal. Back to Rita, my favorite moment with her was when she was speaking to the actress that was playing her in the Our Town community production, and how the actress kind of deconstructed her in a way that was fairly accurate up until the last line, where the actress ultimately thought her main purpose was to just fucking destroy everything with her gross blob body.
Yeah.
And how offended Rita was by that. And she's like, I found my nemesis. That was great.
Yeah, definitely a great moment for the character. The final main character of the show is, of course, Cyborg, aka Victor Stone, who is played by Joyven Wade. And though I'd much rather see this character alongside Beast Boy and the other Titans on their show, the writers do make him work really well in this series as the straight man of the wacky crew.
Yeah, despite the fact that I usually forget that Cyborg is part of this team until his scenes pop up again, it would be hard to imagine ultimately what the series would be without his straight man dynamic. I guess Larry is somewhat of a straight man in his own right.
Yeah, until Cyborg takes Ronnie to the mansion to meet him, then he's just bizarre as anyone else there. I kind of liked that Cyborg kind of got his own scenes to himself in Detroit, just to establish like his own story arc and things like that. But then, he would come back when he was needed. It was kind of nice for him to be able to do that. Cyborg's arc last season was accepting what his father did to him and what he did to his mother, so he had already gone through the parental thematic phase. This season, in order to cope with the trauma of being responsible for his mother's death, being transformed into a cyborg, and going through everything he did with the Doom Patrol, he went to a PTSD therapy group where he met a war veteran and former cybernetically enhanced Black Ops soldier, Ronnie Evers. Cyborg kind of fell in love with her, and through her, had to decide whether or not he was still a superhero who stopped criminals, not only when Ronnie prevented him from getting a mugger arrested, but when he learned that Ronnie herself was responsible for killing one of the men that experimented on her.
They had a fascinating discussion regarding superhero ethics. One of the more interesting discussions I think I've ever seen in any superhero medium, where they were discussing what to do about a kid who had attempted to steal her purse. And Cyborg was like, let's take him to jail. And Ronnie was like, no, let's forgive him, because we shouldn't be defined by the worst things that we've ever done. And their back and forth regarding what to do about this actually repeat offender was just fascinating. You know, on one hand, people will say actions have consequences and you should get what you deserve. And on the other hand, you have people who say people deserve a second chance.
Or a third chance or a fourth chance.
Or as many chances are as necessary for them to eventually learn the error of their ways.
And be inspired by other people's compassions and actions.
Right.
So, like, what's the right answer?
On one hand, I think I side more with the actions have consequences side of the debate, but you can definitely go too far in either direction. It's very interesting. I've always been fascinated by the ethics of superheroism. What's a fascist? What's a pacifist? What's a hero?
This show is just really smart, and I love that it brings up conversations like that. Vic wanted to do the right thing, or what he felt was right, by bringing her in, but because of his love for Ronnie, he couldn't do that, and he was called out on that by his imaginary friend, Dr. Cowboy, played by Phil Morris, the same actor who plays his father, Silas Stone. I'm guessing in Cyborg's loose thread of the season, and whether or not he'll bring Ronnie to justice, he'll probably arrest her and work on taking down the company Quorum in season 3. That's just a guess, though.
Yeah, I think with how hard she came at him when he was trying to discuss with her about what she had done, I think she deserves to be arrested.
Good gosh, I hope there's a season 3. I want to see what happens with all of these loose threads.
There better be a season 3.
Damn it.
If there's not a season 3, I'm going to write my congressman.
Me too. We should all do that. Overall, I really liked this season. You know, it had some drawbacks, sort of, like in the lack of compelling villain, and in my opinion, the gratuitous sex. Apparently to Joseph, sex can never be gratuitous.
Yeah, I'm fine with it, you know?
But those are minor gripes because the season overall was great. And it could have been, in my opinion, 4.5 stars if we could have seen everyone's completed story arcs. But without that closure, I have to give this season 4 stars.
I would agree with that. I think that it's a near perfect series for what it is. I would give it 4.5 stars easily. I think that's what I would have given season 1. But when you're only dealing with a fraction of the story, you have to knock it down a peg. And of course, that's not any fault of the show because of coronavirus, so I do feel bad with the 4-star rating when I really do think that it deserves a 4.5 stars. But ultimately, you know, it is what it is. If they make a season 3, we'll be reviewing that, and hopefully it's just as good and it's able to keep up this quality and maybe even be like a 5-star season. Who knows?
I think that's definitely within the potential of the show. Absolutely.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So that does it for this review. If you guys have seen Doom Patrol Seasons 1 and 2, let us know what you think of them. We'd love to talk about it. And how would you rate the show?
According to our Instagram poll, it looks like most of our followers rated the show at pretty much 4 stars. So it looks like a lot of people agree. You guys could also let us know what you thought about the season by writing to us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com or by visiting us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. You can find links to all of our social accounts by visiting our website, dynamicduel.com.
And on our site, you could also find a link to our Patreon page where we offer bonus content. Please check it out after this episode.
And also on dynamicduel.com is a link to our merchandise store where we sell t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and more with our Dynamic Duel No Prize artwork. And who are you drawing this week, Jonathan?
I think this week I will be drawing Robot Man as a tie-in to not only this episode, but our previous duel episode between him and Thing from the Fantastic Four.
That'll be a cool one. Are you going to give him his leather jacket?
Hell yeah.
Awesome.
We want to remind everyone again to please subscribe to our show if you haven't, or please leave a rating or review on your platform of choice. Sharing this show on social media or in person is also a really big help for us.
But that does it for this episode. In our next episode, we're going to find out who would win in a fight between Bronze Tiger and White Tiger. It's going to be a kung fu showdown between these two martial artist anti-heroes, occasionally villains in the case of Bronze Tiger.
Now, Bronze Tiger is a member of the Suicide Squad. I know very little about White Tiger, so I'm looking forward to learning more.
Yeah, she's cool.
So look forward to that. We want to give a big shout out to our executive producers, Jace, Crump, and John Speas, for helping make this podcast possible. We'll talk to you guys next week. Up, and away.
True believers.